We can agree that the meta on Football Manager is to play shorter passing with higher tempo while pressing much more often with a high press. Well, what if I told you that there is a new meta that allows you to play counter-attacking football where you defend as a unit and hit the opposition with a lightning fast counter-attack? In this video, I'm going to show you how to play counter-attacking on Football Manager. If you're new to the channel, remember to hit the subscribe button so you can get notified when more tactic videos like this do come out here on the channel. Now, I've tried playing counter-attack recently in Football Manager, that's FM2023 and FM2024, and I've done this with 3 teams. That was just to prove to myself that it's actually possible to play a different way on Football Manager and still get points and still win games and still dominate games. I played with a mid-table team in South Africa, and then we went on to come second, scoring the most goals in the league, by the way. And I also got promoted from Scottish League 2 into Scottish League 1 with East Fife, playing this direct counter-attacking style of play. And in FM2024, I went on to dominate La Liga, playing direct attacking style of play with Atletico Madrid because the board would not allow me to do anything else. So what do you need to know about counterattacks? I'll walk you through the formations I used in these different teams that I went on to manage and the player roles that combine to kind of form that attacking unit and defensive unit as well. And most importantly, we're going to look at the mentality that you need to actually play counterattacking on Football Manager. And no, it is not cautious mentality, trust me. Now, my formations were vastly different in all 3 saves, but it largely depends on the players that you have in your squad and the best positions that they like to play. In South Africa, I had a 4-2-3-1 system. That sort of worked well for my key players because I had a defensive midfielder that was the best player in my team and I could just slot him into that role and then have somebody else pair alongside him to try and protect the defense. At East Fife in Scottish League 2, I settled for a 4-1-4-1 DM, and this was unique because I've rarely used this formation before in Football Manager, but it sort of helped us with the counter-attack, and we did have a lot of bodies in defense, and then we had our wingers closer to our fullbacks, so that sort of helped us create a solid block in midfield, and it was difficult for other teams to actually penetrate against us. In more expansive games, I will have my wingers play high and wide, so that way it kind of turned into a 4-3-3, but most of the time it was just a flat 4-1-4-1 system. In Atletico Madrid, I got a bit creative with the formation, and then they had a lot of defenders, so I could play with the back 3, and then instead of central midfielders, I went on to use defensive midfielders, and then I had a player in Florentino Luis who played as my ball-winning midfielder, and then Moises Caicedo plays as the defensive midfielder on support. So these are the 3 shapes that I used to create a counter-attacking style of play. Oh, by the way, I didn't really use wingers. I used an advanced playmaker or attacking midfielder with Antoine Griezmann, and then of course 2 strikers. So this is kind of what it looked like, 5-2-1-2 system. So I'm not saying other formations don't work, they do, and if you follow the principles that I actually used to understand tactical counter-attacking tactics in Football Manager, you probably still will be able to recreate your counter-attacking tactics regardless of the formation that you're using. But it's good to always have a solid defense, so that's one thing you need to pay attention to. You need to have a solid base in order for you to counter from, so you can't play counter-attacking if there's so many players attacking. We'll come back to the back 3. So let's look at how the player roles are going to set up. In order for you to have a solid defense, you do need to have players that can actually stay in their shape and not venture too far forward. So I'm going to take reference to East Fife. When I was managing at East Fife in Scottish League 2, I did have fullbacks play on defend duty because they didn't really have, that adventurous position to actually get forward. They were bad at crossing, they were not the fastest, so they just had to stay in defense and be fullback on defend. And then I had a more adventurous fullback on the left hand side who was able to actually get forward. His crossing wasn't that great, but it was better than the other guy that was playing as fullback on defend. So I had him play as fullback on support duty, and then he was able to get ahead. In central defense, I used 2 central defenders on defend duty. Occasionally, I did go for the no-nonsense centre back, but I noticed that this player was able to actually help us and then clear the ball forward. But when he was clearing the ball forward, he was clearing the ball to the opposition, and then the chance would just keep coming back to us. So I switched from a no-nonsense centre back to a central defender who could be more sensible in the way they actually go on to clear the ball. So like I mentioned, having good numbers back, and then in midfield, you do want to have somebody that can transition between defense and attack very quickly. So a box-to-box midfielder is one of your key players. A central midfielder on support is similar, but he's not as dynamic as a box-to-box midfielder. If you're looking at the defensive midfield, you want to go for a player that is like the segundo volante, which had that dynamism to actually get forward. But if you don't have a segundo volante in your team, you can try a defensive midfielder on support duty. Where is he? Defensive midfielder on support. You can use a roaming playmaker as well, but ideally this will likely be the only playmaker in your team because he's going to cover everything and be the main man in the team. The defensive midfielder, remember, you will have to ask him to get further forward when he's, when the team has possession of the ball. That contributes to the team playing a counter-attacking style of play. You will need bodies behind you to defend, and you will need a good number of bodies up front to actually continue the counter-attack. Now back to the 4-3-3, and it's important to notice that if you're playing in attack, you need to have players that can first of all carry your team in attack and then serve as an outlet for you to play the counter-attacking balls into them. So this is what the Atletico Madrid shape sort of looked like. The roles are kind of wonky right now, they're not really correct, but this is the formation. So in attack, I had a pressing forward on attack DT, and I also had a pressing forward on support DT to actually help us in attack. So what will happen is that when the team goes on to win possession in their own defensive third, we will have players up front that can attack the space and then go on to play the ball to those players, and they can help us start the counter-attack. It helps if the pressing forward is fast. And if you're asking why I use the pressing forward instead of an advanced forward, it's because the players that I had in here, Lautaro Martinez, had a lot of aggression, and he was also well suited to playing the pressing forward on attack. So he could play as an advanced forward, but he was more suited to playing as a pressing forward, and it helped us add that element of pressing into our game. Because what we did use in the out of possession instruction was to play a mid block instead of a high press all the time. It was in a different system that we went on to use the high press, but a mid block did work for us, and then with a more often, to some extent, much more often trigger press. So having the pressing forward in there kind of gave us that bite in front, so the teams would not just pass their way through us. They could actually go on to engage the opposition and try to win the ball back. Now you notice that my back three here, there's a lot of players on defense. With Atletico Madrid, what I did use was to play Josko Vardio as a wide centre back on support DT. That way you can actually get forward. I noticed that having a lot of players on support does help the counter-attacking side of play, because more players are going to help out in defense and also help out in attack. Now my wing backs were not conventional wing backs that would just sit deep when we were defending. They had the ability to get forward. So occasionally I would use a complete wing back on attack DT, or also, in fact, I actually had a wing back on attack DT in here, and then a wing back on support DT on this other side. I did try the complete wing backs on attack DT, but they were quite adventurous, and in some cases they will work. But for this one, I needed to have players that could, serve as a through ball outlet for us to actually continue counter attacks, and another player that could be a lot more adventurous and swing crosses into the box. So not allowing us to get pinned back into a back five was quite vital, and why I went on to use wing back on attack and on support. Now for team instructions, you will want to pay attention to this and really deviate from it. What I like to do when I was playing in possession for three of these teams that I went on to do, they had similar team instructions when they were in possession. So what was going to happen was that I would play a slightly more direct passing and a higher tempo. I wouldn't go higher in the tempo, and I wouldn't drop the passing directness anyway. So what if I wanted to combat the excessive directness of our tactic, I would go on to include walk the ball into the box, but often I didn't really need to do that. In order not to waste possession, I did still ask my goalkeeper to play out of defense. So because when we are in possession of the ball, we have to play a different way from when we just regain possession and then we have to counter attack. So when we're in possession, we will play out of defense normally and try to keep the ball and try to move it around, but slightly more direct. That's why I went for slightly more direct. But in case we do go on to lose possession and then the opposition has possession, we have to be in our shape. I'm going to show you that in out of possession instructions. And the moment we win it back, we can go ahead and hit the opposition on the counter attack. Pass into space was really crucial for the way we went on to play our game, and then run at the opposition's defense. If you're playing possession football, you can go for dribble less. Another very crucial instruction you need to include for counter attacking is to be slightly more disciplined, because you want your team to not try anything too fancy. They need to follow the script as you have given it to them. So be more expressive doesn't mean be more attacking. Be more disciplined doesn't mean be more defensive. It means follow the team instructions as it is given to you. So that's what I understand. If you look at more disciplined, the team is going to play as a robust shape and work as a collective group, and without trying anything too individual in their own way. Now in transition, it did help that we had counters selected for this system and the goalkeeper distributing it quickly. Those were the only two main instructions that I went on to include, and often the goalkeeper instruction I didn't really go on to turn that on. It wasn't really necessary in most of the leagues that I went on to play. I think only Atletico Madrid actually forced my hand to distribute the goalkeeper, or to ask the goalkeeper to distribute it quickly. What about the regroup instruction? Usually I would use this towards the ending of the game when I've already gone on to score a goal or two, and then I know that I'm planning to actually go on to sit back and defend. Then I can go on to regroup. Often I would have this turned off. And counter press and regroup, I didn't really touch this too much in South Africa or in Scottish League 2, but with Atletico Madrid I did have counter press undone, because we were a top team, we were a bigger team, so we could go on to impose ourselves on the opposition. For out of possession instructions, I did play with a mid block and a standard defensive line, but then I had my counter pressing, or my trigger press was set to much more often trigger press. This was when I was going for a South African goal scoring counter attacking tactic. This did help us at a point, but I noticed that in Scottish League, much more often trigger press didn't really help us that much, because our players weren't just winning the ball back. I don't know why. So I did numb this down to a more often trigger press, and then I played with a low block and to some extent standard defensive line, or occasionally the slightly high defensive line. That kind of created a block in midfield to try and help us win possession when the ball was played into this territory right here. So back to our back three. With Atletico Madrid, it was very different because I wanted to create a dominating counter-attacking style of play. I told you that I had pressing forwards on attack. That's because I did go on to play with a mid block occasionally, but also a high press and a high defensive line. I did go on to push my trigger press to much more often with Atletico Madrid because they were able to actually do it. We're the top team. We could actually do what we wanted to the opposition. In transition, like I mentioned, I did go on to have counter-attacking, yes, and counter-pressing turned on with goalkeeper distributing it quickly. Where he was going to distribute it or the type wasn't really a serious thing. Jan Oblak knew what to do when he had possession of the ball. While we were in possession, the only thing that I did go on to tweak for Atletico Madrid was because I used a fairly wide attacking width. That's looking at the way my team is set up. There's a lot of players in the middle of the field, so I had to go on to switch this to attack to actually balance the amount of players that we have in the center. Passing directness, like I mentioned before, I did have this on slightly more direct passing and slightly higher tempo. Earlier on in the video, I did tell you about the mentality being important in the way that you're going to play this game, and for some reason the cautious mentality I did try it to some extent, but in South Africa it didn't work, so I had to play a different mentality there. It was only at East Fife that I had some good results playing a cautious mentality, but overall it wasn't very helpful because it allowed your team to be too defensive and you weren't able to play that lightning fast counter-attacking that I wanted to do. The balanced mentality worked on occasion with Atletico Madrid. That's when I was playing against Real Madrid and Barcelona and other top teams like PSG in the Champions League. But to play counter-attacking, I didn't even bother touching the positive mentality. It was too slow, too passive. It was best suited for a possession-based style of play and not a direct counter-attacking style of play. The mentality I went for was the attacking mentality. With the attacking mentality selected and occasionally slightly more direct and slightly higher tempo, it had the kind of balance between going forward in a lightning fast counter-attacking manner and also not wasting too many chances when you're actually going forward. The intent was to actually go on and score goals as quickly as possible. You can see here from the attacking mentality what it says that you are expected to actually dominate the ball and go on teams and try to score goals. So whenever we had possession of the ball, immediately the team regains possession, they will look to attack. This was a secret weapon that actually helped us with the counter-attacking style of play. So if you look at how many players we have defending, the moment we go on to win possession, the team knows that the intent here is to actually go on to attack. So they will sacrifice their defensive positioning and take up attacking positions to actually help the team complete that counter-attack. This was why we're able to have a lot of bodies up front when we're going to hit the opposition on the counter. So guys, a quick recap for what you need when you go on to build a counter-attacking tactic on Football Manager. You're going to need a lot of bodies in the back to actually help you defend. You're going to need a midfielder that has the ability to connect with the defense to the midfield and also has the ability to get forward as quickly as possible. You need the right team instructions that actually encourage your team to play counter-attacking football. Walking the ball into the box might not really be helpful in that scenario. If you're playing a narrow tactic like this, you will need width, so you need to have a wide outlet like wing backs, or you can go on to increase your team's attacking width to actually help them play a bit wider. And most importantly, you need the right mentality to actually do it. So if you're going on to play with a balanced mentality, it's good enough. You could actually play a high tempo attacking or counter-attacking style of play with a balanced mentality, but ideally you want an attacking mentality and a lot of bodies defending and players that are willing to defend to actually balance that counter-attacking system. If you did find this video useful, remember to leave a like on it and also to subscribe to the channel for more Football Manager tactic breakdowns like this. I'll see you with more tactic videos. And if you want to see how the direct attacking tactic worked out in Football Manager with Atletico Madrid, I'm going to save a link in the description just for you. I'm also going to attach the South African tactic that I used and the East Fife tactic that I used. All of them are going to be in the description so you can see how the tactics turned out with counter-attacking on Football Manager. See you in the next video.